Okay, so see, now that's a fair and a practical question. So what I wanted to do tonight is I wanted to go back and take a section of video we watched when we were watching Patterns of Evidence that deals particularly with Jericho. And you'll see probably the significance of this more than you did when we watched it the first time. So, guys, ready? Yeah, Nick.
Was this Jericho unearthed? Is that a section that you're about to play? Is the unearthed Jericho?
Yes. Yeah, that's what we're taking a look at here. This is at Dr. Tim. Can't remember his last name. Muck something or another. Okay. And this is that Patterns of Evidence that we looked at. So what they're doing is they're trying to get the timeline as to when the actual conquest of the Promised Land took place, which of course began with Jericho. And the archaeologists all say it didn't happen. And of course the reason is they're looking at the wrong time. So they're about 200 years off. So any other thoughts or comments? Yeah.
Just that you could tell the person asking you that everything that is historical concerning the Bible is controversial.
Yes, absolutely.
So you have to reason through and study the facts and not just go where the wind blows you.
Yeah. This is a guy who was
blows you or whatever.
Yeah, and this is a guy who was trying to teach it. See, he was trying to figure out how you handle that objection. It's what he was trying to do. But you're right. Is the resurrection of Jesus controversial? Yeah. I mean, it's the most controversial. So yeah, it's going to be a fight. It's a good point, Nick. Yeah, absolutely. So just because something's controversial, don't avoid it. But in this case, it's good to have some facts. So I'm going to start here. And
an Egyptian civilization, and that's where you'll find Moses and the Exodus.
But what about the final step of that sequence? The conquest of Canaan, the land that had been promised to Abraham and his descendants. Would the earlier pattern of evidence continue there as well?
The children of Israel leave Egypt. They travel to Mount Sinai, where they received God's law and made a covenant to be his people. Then, after 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, Moses transferred his authority to Joshua and ascended the heights of Mount Nebo, and there he died. The Israelites had been waiting centuries for the promise to be fulfilled, and now it was Joshua who would lead them in their conquest of Canaan.
The land of Canaan was very different from Egypt. It was a land ruled by many independent city-states with names like Hatzor, Jericho, Hebron, and Arad. The history of these cities has been divided into two major time periods: the Middle Bronze Age, matching Egypt's Middle Kingdom, when they were thriving and fortified by high walls. Then a sudden destruction and burning came upon the land, leaving those cities in ruins and bringing in a new period known as the Late Bronze Age, matching the time of Egypt's New Kingdom. Archaeologist Norma Franklin represents a large group of scholars that sees no evidence for a biblical conquest of the Promised Land.
As an archaeologist, I hate to disappoint people, but we have no evidence for a single mass migration of people from one country over a period of 40 years wandering and coming into another country. There is destruction, amazing destructions. None of them actually fit one another. They all happened within 100 years, but not overnight. Not what you'd expect in, Joshua didn't live that long if he existed. Okay.
First and foremost, many places which are mentioned in the Joshua and the conquest story, specifically mentioned, as major places in Canaan, were excavated, and no evidence for a city in the late Bronze Age has ever been found. And I'm speaking about major excavations, and we are speaking about many sites. It's systemic. It's not only a single site.
This is a serious problem with the conquest, if it really happened in the Late Bronze Age. But again, What if it happened in the earlier Middle Bronze Age? It seemed only logical to begin by looking at the key site of Jericho, the first city the Israelites are said to have destroyed. And we know exactly where that was.
Major archaeological excavations at Jericho began with a German team in the early 1900s led by Ernst Sellen. This was followed by a British team headed by John Garstang in the 1930s. At the time of their digs, both Sellen and Garstang believed they had uncovered a layer of destruction that matched the biblical story. However, things took a dramatic turn when Kathleen Kenyon dug at Jericho in the 1950s. She demonstrated that there was no evidence for a destruction of Jericho matching the biblical account because she dated the demise of the city much earlier. A wave of skepticism began to sweep across the field of archaeology. In an instant, Kenyon's discoveries at Jericho had undermined the entire Exodus story.
She was expecting that if there was any evidence there at all, it would be in what we call the Late Bronze Age. And it simply isn't there. If the Israelites had arrived in the 13th century, they'd have found almost nobody there, no walls to collapse. It just wouldn't have fitted the biblical narrative. So her excavations helped to compound this very negative view that was developing, not just from Jericho, but from other sites as well.
Is there a time when Jericho was destroyed, or the walls fell down, or it was burned?
I don't think so. I don't think that we have evidence, this kind of evidence in the case of Jericho, and I don't think that we can really look for this evidence. We are very much past this phase of archaeological research.
But David Rohl sees things differently.
If people are telling us that there was no Jericho at the time that Joshua conquered the Promised Land, and therefore Joshua is a piece of fiction, and therefore the conquest is a piece of fiction, and then probably Exodus is a piece of fiction as well. If that's the case, why don't we ask the simple question, well, when was Jericho around? When was Jericho destroyed? And start from that point of view.
The conquest began with the Israelites crossing the Jordan River. Joshua sent men to spy out the massively walled city of Jericho, and there they met a harlot named Rahab, who reported that all in the land had heard what God had done for the Israelites, and they were terrified. Rahab hid the spies and aided their escape to the mountains.
What evidence do you see matching the conquest of Jericho?
First of all, we're told that Jericho was fortified. When the archaeologists dug the city, particularly Kathleen Kenyon, when she did her work in the 50s, discovered that the tell that the city's built on was surrounded by a great earthen rampart.
Excavators found that Jericho was protected by a brilliant defensive system. At its base was a stone retaining wall more than 15 feet high, with a defensive extension wall of mud bricks rising higher still. Beyond this was the rampart, a steep slope covered with a slick surface of white plaster, where attackers would have been exposed to arrows and sling stones from above. At the top of this rampart was the main city wall, also made of mud brick, this one more than 25 feet high and 10 feet thick.
Imagine the dread and the desperate panic of the people of Jericho. Day after day for 6 days, the people of Israel are walking around their city with the Ark of the Covenant and the sounding of ram's horns. Then on the seventh day, they encircle the city 7 times, and the priests give a long blast on their horns. The people let loose with a mighty shout. The walls come tumbling down. Allowing the Israelites to climb up into the city, taking it, and commencing the conquering of the land of Israel.
Well, when the city met its end, these mud brick walls collapsed, and they actually fell down to the base of the stone retaining wall. Kenyon describes it very and in detail in her excavation report. And then we're told they set the city on fire. That's exactly what we find. Jericho was massively destroyed by fire. Kenyon said it was very clear that within the city, the walls of the buildings had fallen as well. And she says that the walls fell before the fire. And so we have the sequence that we read in the Bible. First, the fallen walls, and then the city being set on fire by the Israelites.
Excavations at the site uncovered clear evidence for a massive destruction by fire, with a very thick burn layer of extremely high temperatures. This caused Kenyon to attribute the burning to an enemy attack and not fires that would result solely from an earthquake.
She claimed that the city was destroyed around 1550 BC by the Egyptians. Well, there's absolutely no evidence that the Egyptians were ever in the Jordan Valley at this time period.
So because Kenyon dated the destruction of Jericho 150 years before the Israelites were supposed to be there, she made no connection between the destruction and the biblical account. But once again, this date fits the earlier pattern I've been seeing.
Within the city, a very unique discovery was made. Both Garstang and Kenyon found in the houses that they excavated many jars full of grain that were stored there.
The store jars in the city were pretty full. That suggests the harvest had only recently been gathered in. And the details in the biblical account point to an event that happened sometime in the spring. And down there in the Jordan Valley, spring is when the harvest is gathered in, the grain harvest.
When the Israelites crossed the Jordan, the first thing they did was celebrate Passover. Well, when is Passover? Again, the spring of the year.
The full jars also indicate that if this was a siege, it was very short, unusual for a strong fortified city such as Jericho.
And that matches the biblical account because the siege was only 7 days. Otherwise, the people inside would have consumed a lot of that grain if it dragged out for months.
Was the grain found all over the city?
Yes, in every house that was excavated, they found jars of grain.
There's one other intriguing detail at Jericho that fits the Bible remarkably well. It had to do with a promise made to Rahab.
She actually lived in the city wall, and after hiding the spies, they promised her that she and her family would be protected when they attacked the city. And they kept their promise. She had marked her home with a scarlet cord, which she hung out the window.
But if her house was built into the city wall, how could it have survived?
I came across the actual archaeological report that the German excavator of Jericho, Ernst Sellen, had published in 1913. He was the first to conduct a major excavation of the site, and I could see that his work was impressive, but now seemed to have been forgotten. Here were detailed plans and photographs, including one part of the site, which echoed the Rahab story in an unexpected way.
The Germans found that in this one short stretch on the north side of the city, there were houses built on the rampart between the lower city wall and the upper city wall. And some of those houses were built right up against the lower city wall. They found that the city wall did not fall in this area. So that provides an explanation for how the spies could have saved Rahab and her family, because God brought the wall down everywhere else except where her house was, and we have archaeological evidence to back that up.
Well, what if people say, well, you're biased?
I think everybody in the field is biased, one way or another. I admit my bias. However, I cannot make up the evidence. I cannot plant it in the ground. I have analyzed it and compared it to the Bible, and I say, wow, it matches exactly. That's science. Look at your evidence and come to a conclusion based on the evidence.
Archaeologists have uncovered a city with high fortification walls that fell down, evidence that the city was intentionally burned after the collapse. Storage jars filled with charred grain, evidence of a short siege in springtime, and a section of houses within the wall, miraculously preserved, just as in the biblical account. According to the biblical account, Joshua spoke a curse against anyone who would rebuild the city of Jericho. And the archaeology shows that after the destruction, the city of Jericho was indeed abandoned for centuries.
Well, you can see how somebody has said, I've heard that the stuff on Jericho is bogus. Heard that Garstang's work is wrong, right? Well, you can see if you get a chance to watch this section of this video and show it to them, how that totally destroys that. Kenyon herself, her work verified the biblical account. She just put the wrong date on it. Okay, well, that's pretty solid stuff. Any thoughts or comments on that? And again, most of you guys got cell phones, or if you got a tablet of some kind, iPad or one of the other tablets, you can actually show these videos and stuff right on there. I'm showing you this off of Amazon Prime. Okay. The other one I'm showing you off of YouTube. Okay. So we've got the capabilities to do some amazing stuff, because these videos communicate in a much stronger way than you and I could possibly verbally communicate. We could talk about how there was a section of the wall that didn't get torn down, but when you actually see it in the video, see that wall, from the Germans' work from the early 1900s, and you see those photographs, see, that's pretty powerful stuff. Any other thoughts or comments on that?
Was that part 1 or 2?
Let's see, this is number 1. Yeah. That's what he's doing. He's doing the chronology to try to figure out, because as we talked before, they try to say that the Exodus, if it took place during the reign of Ramses II of Egypt. Well, that's too late. That's about 1450 or 1250. It's about 200 years too late. And so, but you have to go back and look. You realize these guys make assumptions all the time. Okay, again, using the geology example, how do you know that Madison limestone is 330 million years old? Well, it's Madison limestone, so it's got to be 330 million years old. See, they just make assumptions. These guys in archaeology do the same thing. See, there's kind of a chronology that some scholar set up some years ago, and everybody holds to that chronology, and they don't necessarily go back and check it. And that's why it's really important sometimes to have guys that got a little bit of expertise or time to go do some research into this. So, anything else? Okay, well, let's take a look at Nineveh then. Okay, we looked at Jericho. Now, in Luke's video, he referenced, gotta get rid of you. Go up here. So I wanted to take another look at Nineveh here. Oh, that's not the one. Oh, yeah. There we go.
In order to do this, we have to go back to the mid 1800s. We have to understand that if Nineveh wasn't found in the Bible, nobody would have remembered it. Nobody would have gone looking for it. Nobody would have cared to excavate it. And so the whole story of Nineveh and its excavation is Bible driven.
We are here in Mosul, Iraq. We're on top of the roof of the building that we're staying in. Mosul was the headquarters of ISIS during 2014 and 2015, and because of that, much of the city still lies in ruins. We're up on this roof where we're staying, and right behind me, we're very close to the ruins of ancient Nineveh.
And really, I can't think of a better
example for how archaeology confirms the reliability of the Bible than the site of Nineveh. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really supports me and the making of these videos. Also, I'll leave a link in the description below where you can order a copy of my book, Where God Came Down, The Archaeological Evidence. Thanks for making it #1 in archaeology. And also keep in mind that it makes for a good gift to give to others. Nineveh is located on the Tigris River in northern Mesopotamia. In the book of Jonah, the word of the Lord came to Jonah. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. Therefore the Bible calls Nineveh a great city. In 1820, the British agent Claudius Rich explored the ruins of Nineveh. Though he wasn't the first to visit these ruins, he was the first to publish an accurate description of them. He wrote, "I rode on, passing through the area of Nineveh. The walls of Nineveh have become like the natural hills." This is what Claudius Rich described. The city wall line looks like a long natural hill. And this is where the stone wall and one of the many city gates has been exposed through excavation. This top plan was drawn in the mid-1800s and shows the city walls. This arrow shows the camera angle in the next shot, showing the northeast corner of the city wall. These wall lines enclose the ruins of Nineveh, which can still be seen today. In this way, we can see the massive size of Nineveh, showing that the ruins of Nineveh match the descriptions of the city in the Bible. Jonah chapter 3 says, "Now Nineveh was a very large city. It took 3 days to go through it." Keep in mind that the walls that can be traced in these ruins, these are just the inner city walls. There were also outer city walls and suburbs. And so the sheer size of these ruins matches the descriptions of Nineveh in the Bible, where it describes Nineveh as a great city, as a very large city, with a population of more than 120,000 people. West of the ancient city flows the Tigris River. And within the ruins are 2 mounds. The smaller, but more sacred of the 2 is called Nebi Yunus, which in Arabic means the prophet Jonah. This preserves the name of the Israelite prophet in the Bible. The Lord had decided to destroy Nineveh because of the wickedness of the people. Only the more than 120,000 people living there didn't know about this destruction. So the Lord had compassion on them, and he sent them an Israelite prophet, Jonah, to speak to them and to warn them. This was a sign to them, because surely they knew about this guy and had heard about, hey, this is the guy, they must have been thinking, that got swallowed by the huge fish, that spent 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a fish. And now he's here speaking to us about the coming destruction of our city. Maybe we should listen to him. And so when the king and the people heard Jonah's preaching, they repented, and the Lord relented and did not destroy the city, which allowed Nineveh to continue in history until later it became the capital of the Assyrian Empire. On top of the Nebi Yunus mound was a mosque that ISIS blew up in 2014, but underneath it were the ruins of a church that preserved the tradition that these were the ruins of Nineveh. In 1830, the British colonel, Robert Taylor, found among the ruins of Nebi Yunus a 6-sided prism covered with cuneiform writing. This inscription, often referred to as the Taylor Prism, is currently on display in the British Museum. So this is the Taylor Prism. The problem with the Taylor inscription is that back in 1830, when it was found, nobody could read a word of it. Northwest of Nebi Yunus is a second, much larger ancient mound called Kuyunjik, and next to it flows the Koza River. So tradition and local knowledge and the early explorers all identified the ruins across the Tigris River from Mosul to be those of Nineveh. However, by the mid 1800s, this had been brought into question because a few other scholars were identifying other sites as Nineveh. And so in order to establish these ruins as Nineveh, then evidence was going to have to be found. And to do this, the site was going to have to be excavated. So in 1849, the British adventurer Austin Layard became determined to put the massive mound of Kuyunjik to the spade. Based on the abundance of fragmented surface remains, Layard chose to begin his dig here, on the southwest corner of the mound. Layard struck a vertical shaft, and at a depth of about 20 feet, his dig team hit a row of fired bricks. After some more clearing, it soon became evident that the wall belonged to a monumental building, and over the next several weeks, the largest palace ever excavated began to be unearthed. He determined from the surface material that this would be a good place to dig, and so he immediately struck the ruins of this palace complex behind me here. Lining the inside of the mud brick walls of the palace were slabs of gypsum, where elaborate scenes of hunting, military campaigns, and other glorious accomplishments of the king were carved into the stone. And in his palace here, you have the mud brick wall, and this really shows how these Assyrian wall reliefs work. You have this huge slab of stone here, pressed up against the wall, lining the wall, and on the outside of it are carvings of statues and people and gods and then writing. If you follow me over here, you see the slab of stone pressed up against the mud brick wall, and then you see cuneiform writing on the outside of it. Back in the time of Layard, what he did is he dug along the walls. In fact, it's estimated that he dug about 2 full miles of walls, where when he had a really well-preserved relief, stone relief, then he would take that off the wall and ship it back to the British Museum. As Layard's excavation crew were uncovering this huge palace, they found its central courtyard, and they dug to the front of the courtyard where they unearthed these 2 huge human-headed winged bulls that were side by side. And as they uncovered them, they realized that they were guarding the entrance to something that further excavation showed was a monumental hallway. As Layard excavated, he prepared a top plan of the palace he was uncovering. So I have the plans, his drawings here, and then what I try to do is I try to match up his plan with the site itself and understand where I am. These are the ruins of the palace Layard excavated, and this is Layard's top plan. These 3 arrows show the 3 passages at the front of the central court, and here they are in the ruins. The most monumental of these 3 passages was the one in the middle. And I think that what we're doing is we're walking right through this gap right here on his plan as we walk through here. You can follow me. When Layard began excavating the entrance to this central passage, his team found 2 human-headed winged bulls on either side of it. This proved to be just the beginning of a monumental hallway that led from the palace's central courtyard to its most important showroom. And so what we had here was a gap, and then another gap, and a long hall going off of this main courtyard here. And at the end of that was the main showroom for the whole palace. Looking straight down, we see the ruins of the monumental hallway leading from the central courtyard into the showroom. The walls of this room at the end of the hall were lined with stone reliefs depicting the siege of a single city. The question Layard wanted to know was, what important city was this, and to which Assyrian king did the palace he was excavating belong? The original stone reliefs from this room are on display in the British Museum in London, where they have recreated the showroom Layard discovered. On the wall to the right of the showroom's entrance was a stone relief showing an Assyrian king sitting on a throne on top of a hill, watching the battle for the city. Above and to the left of the enthroned king was a short cuneiform inscription that solved the mystery. Since the decipherment of cuneiform was being advanced by scholars, Layard was able to include the translation of the inscription in his book about his excavations, which he published in 1853. It read, "Sennacherib, the mighty king, king of the country of Assyria, sitting on the throne of judgment before the city of Lachish. I give permission for its slaughter." So keep in mind that, yes, they found the name Sennacherib engraved in stone, but this would have been meaningless except for the fact that Sennacherib is found in the Bible as the name of the Assyrian king whose capital is Nineveh. 2 Kings 19:36 says, "Sennacherib, king of Assyria, returned to Nineveh and stayed there." So now it was known with certainty, with the finding and translation of this inscription and other inscriptions found in this excavation, it was known with certainty that the ruins across the Tigris River from Mosul, this was Nineveh. And the building that Layard was excavating was the palace of Sennacherib, and that this main showroom that off of the main courtyard was pointing to like a telescope was depicting the city of Lachish, the second most important city in the kingdom of Judah. And this was surprising because they were expecting it to be a much more important city, like the most important city of a nation, the most important city of an important nation. The most important city of the kingdom of Judah is the capital of Judah, which is Jerusalem. So why in this main showroom is it Lachish, the second most important city in the kingdom of Judah? The inscription on the Taylor prism could now also be read, and was an inscription of none other than Sennacherib himself. On it, Sennacherib says, "As to Hezekiah the Jew, he did not submit to my yoke. I laid siege to 46 of his strong cities, walled forts, and to the countless small villages in their vicinity, and conquered them." Notice that Hezekiah, the king of Judah in the Bible, is named by Sennacherib. This event is also recorded in the Bible. Isaiah chapter 36 says, "In the 14th year of King Hezekiah's reign, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, attacked all the fortified cities of Judah and captured them." In the land of the Bible, in the fall of the year, we have the olive harvest, which is very distinct because it's very violent, actually, because the way that olives are harvested from the trees are literally, they're beaten out of the branches with these big sticks. And we have these falling olives. And so Isaiah uses this as a metaphor for the Assyrian invasion of Judah. And these falling olives that are being beaten out of the trees, these are the people dying, and these are the cities that are falling in the kingdom of Judah. So these winged bowls were on either side from the central court, looking down to the Lachish room in Sennacherib's palace in Nineveh. Visible at the very end of the long monumental hall was the stone relief at the center of the back wall of the showroom. and carved on it was the siege ramp at Lachish. This is a stone picture of the siege of Lachish. And so you can see all these Assyrians coming up the siege ramp on either side here. You can see the huge war machines with the battering rams. So in 2 Chronicles 32:9, it says that while Sennacherib, king of Assyria, and his forces are laying siege to Lachish, that he sends his officers up to Jerusalem to deliver a message to Hezekiah and the people there. So we have the Bible and the Assyrian records coming together in this event. This is the dramatic event between the Assyrian records and the Israelite records in the Bible. This is Tel Lachish, the mound of ruins of the city the Assyrians attacked in 701 BC. Since the Bible says that Sennacherib laid siege to Lachish, and since the stone reliefs from Sennacherib's palace show us a stone carving of the Assyrian siege ramp at Lachish, then it should not come as a surprise that in 1973 at Lachish, the Assyrian siege ramp was discovered and excavated. This is what the excavations looked like in 1973, and this is how they look today. And so you can see all these Assyrians coming up the siege ramp on either side. This is the Assyrian siege ramp on the Lachish reliefs. And outlined here is the Assyrian siege ramp being excavated at Tel Lachish. So I'm at Lachish, and behind me here is the Assyrian siege ramp going from ground level, all these pile of rocks, all the way up to the outer city wall. An earlier excavation had cut into the mound, leaving a vertical section. Later in 1973, when this vertical section was analyzed, it was realized that the mound that had previously been cut into was made up of a massive pile of small stones. All these stones that are about the size that an Assyrian soldier could take and throw onto that pile. What you're looking at here is the exposed inner core of the pile of stones of the Assyrian siege ramp, extending from ground level to the city wall of Lachish. Beyond this wall are the excavation squares that explored the inside of the city, opposite the siege ramp. To give you an idea of how long the siege ramp is, how far it is from ground level up to the outer city wall of Lachish, I'm going to have my son run up the siege ramp all the way to the wall, and I'll get a shot of him doing that to give you some perspective. So this is the outer city wall of Lachish. This is where this massive siege ramp comes up to. This is the specific area on the ground that is being depicted in the stone pictures that we have from Sennacherib's palace in Nineveh. This is where the people above are fighting for their lives, for their very existence. and where the Assyrians with their huge siege engines are assaulting this wall. Archaeologically, all the things that you see depicted in the stone reliefs that are being thrown down from the walls, the arrowheads, the sling stones, all that was found by the masses in this particular area. So behind me here, where you see the houses, that's where the Assyrians set up camp. And I mean, can you imagine what the Judeans, the people of Lachish, were thinking as they watched the most powerful army on earth come in and start setting up camp there? The Assyrians came in with an undefeated record. Every single city that they had laid siege to, they had taken. And the people in this city knew that. And so they must have felt an incredible amount of doom hanging over them as they watched the Assyrians set up camp. We know from the reliefs that Sennacherib would take his position on this hill over here and watch the show. And the show was right here where they were building the siege ramp. And so these Assyrian soldiers would come and throw these rocks one at a time until estimated 19,000 tons of rocks were piled up to the base of the city wall. And the people were fighting for their very existence, but they were no match for the Assyrians. The Assyrians did what they always did. They breached the city wall, burned the city, killed a bunch of the people, and sent the rest of them into exile.
Nearby, a mass grave had been discovered that contained the remains of over 1,500 people who had been killed in the conflict. After capturing Lachish, the Assyrian army burned the entire city. After the fall of Lachish, the only fortified city that is left in the kingdom of Judah is the capital, Jerusalem, and the Assyrians lay siege to it. In his inscription, Sennacherib says, "Hezekiah, I made a prisoner in Jerusalem, like a bird in a cage." Now, if the Assyrians capture Jerusalem, then that means God has broken his promise that from these people is going to come in the future the Messiah. And so God can't allow Jerusalem to be destroyed, so he delivers Jerusalem through a mighty miracle. 2 Kings chapter 19 says, "That night the angel of the Lord went out and put to death 185,000 in the Assyrian camp. When the people got up the next morning, there were all the dead bodies. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, broke camp and withdrew. He returned to Nineveh and stayed there." So in Sennacherib's inscription, he is listing out, boasting about his great accomplishments. And one of these is that he lays siege to Jerusalem, but he never mentions that he captures Jerusalem.
Now, Sennacherib is bragging about all the cities that he destroyed, and the city that he puts in the most predominant place in his palace is the city of Lachish. There's no question that what the city he wanted to put there to brag about was Jerusalem. But he doesn't have Jerusalem in his main showroom. Why? Because according to his own records, according to the Bible, he never captured Jerusalem. And so he has the second most important city in Judah there instead. This is archaeological evidence. Sennacherib never captured Jerusalem. The Bible says that that's because of a miracle. It's pretty easy to believe that it was because of a miracle, because of all the cities that the Assyrians attacked during the whole Assyrian Empire, all the way from north of where we are right now, all the way as far south to Egypt, and everywhere in between. Every single city that the Assyrians attacked, laid siege to, they took, with one single exception, and that is the city of Jerusalem. We know this from the Bible. We know this archaeologically from the Assyrian records that were found, and we know that from the archaeology right here in the palace of Sennacherib.
The last mention of Nineveh in the Old Testament is Zephaniah's prophecy of the city's destruction. Zephaniah says, "He will stretch out his hand against the north and destroy Assyria, leaving Nineveh utterly desolate and dry as a desert. Flocks and herds will lie down there. What a ruin she has become." Today, the once great city of Nineveh is a place where shepherds graze their flocks. The prophecies against her were fulfilled in 612 BC, when the Babylonians and their allies completely destroyed the city that has laid in desolate ruins ever since, for more than 2,400 years. So essentially, what was discovered in Nineveh were the Assyrian records. And so now the Assyrian records could be compared with the Israelite records in the Bible. And especially in this shared event between these two records, which was the Assyrian conquest of Judah. And we find that the two agree. They're from two radically different perspectives, but they agree in the details and the events of what happened and who was in charge of them. And so we have the same kings named in both records. We have also the details of the events themselves, of what happened, what was taken, what wasn't taken. I can't think of a site where everything comes together, the archaeology, the biblical record, the extra biblical record, to demonstrate that the Bible is talking about real people, real places, real events, real destructions, and real deliverances. And this is good news, because we are in the same situation in the world today that they were back in the days of Nineveh. Isaiah in chapter 24 uses the metaphor of the beating of the olive tree again, but this time for the destruction of the whole earth. So will it be on the earth and among the nations as when an olive tree is beaten. We don't want to be like that last city of Nineveh that was proud and that was destroyed forever. We want to be like the people that lived in that earlier city of Nineveh, who heard the preaching of Jonah and repented of their wickedness, and therefore were spared. If he had compassion, as he tells Jonah, on the 120,000 people living in Nineveh, then why wouldn't he have compassion on the people, all the people living in the world? And he does, just as he sent the Ninevites a sign, so he sends us a sign as well. And who is that sign? An Israelite Messiah. In Matthew chapter 12, Jesus says, "A wicked and adulterous generation asks for a sign, but none will be given it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a huge fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. The men of Nineveh will stand up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it, for they repented at the preaching of Jonah. And now something greater than Jonah is here." The sign is Jesus. He's the one that spent 3 days and 3 nights in the grave. But on that third day, he rose from the dead. Maybe we should listen to him. And if we listen to him and believe him, then we have salvation in his name. Thanks for watching. I appreciate it. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It helps support.
And don't forget to read Acts 2:38. Any thoughts or any comments on this? Nick?
I just have one real quick. Have you seen the book that he?
I haven't seen the book, no.
Yeah, it looked kind of interesting.
Does look interesting. Yep, that would be very.
It's $26 on Amazon.
Yeah. But this is what I call reserve firepower. See, and a lot of times that reserve firepower is what really makes a difference when you're having a personal study and trying to convince them of the authenticity of the scriptures. See, any other thoughts or comments here? Question tonight? So you fired up? Good. Let's pray. Holy and righteous Father in heaven, very excited that we could be here tonight, and just really appreciate the audio-visual materials that we do have at our age. Probably is necessary, but we've got them, and we thank you for that. Just help us to be shining lights in a dark place, and help us to go forth with a lot of joy, and just appreciating what you do and what you've done and what you will do. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. You guys have a great week.